So you want to make a skill tree, but don't know how. In this tutorial, I will show you a simple and effective skill tree you can do by yourself without plugins. To start off, I'll just show you what I made in less than probably 5-10 minutes, only because I've done stuff like this before within the engine. So you talk to this person, do you want to see your skill tree? Of course, you hit yes. We have a simple background cursor, skill 1, skill 2, and skill 3. And then you can see that our cursor can go on and on until it reaches... Actually, nope, it can keep going. Okay, well, we'll fix that. Yeah, wow, okay. So you have skill 1, 2, and 3. You can select each one. Would you like to purchase this skill? This skill is the basic fire magic. This skill will cost 1 skill point. You have learned the magic fire. Super simple, effective, easy. I don't believe that I set up these. I did not. So that's the gist of it. You can obviously have way better, graphics and all of that. It depends on you as a developer and or creator. Put as much time and energy that you want into this. This is only a very basic tutorial to show you how to get started. Now that I've shown you what the skill tree looks like, let's have a look into how the event was built for that to work. So we have our NPC here just as an example. You can have a stove or whatever other image you would like. The image does not matter. So to start off, I just put a text box. Would you like to see your skill tree? Gave the player choices, yes or no. When no is selected, it cancels out of this event by default. When yes, then I used show picture, which is the background, skill 1, skill 2, skill 3, and our cursor. For the X, which is this number for each of these, and the Y, you will need to do trial and error and figure out where that is for you. It's kind of annoying, but I do it with every menu that I build. And these X and Y variables are what our cursor is going to be. So I already have it equal to 100, 100. But typically this would end up equaling X and Y cursor. And so this asks this where it should be. So these two variables will tell our picture 5 or cursor that, hey, you should be at 100X and 100Y. This does not matter. This was for tutorial purposes only, just to show that you could purchase the fire with the skill point. I need 1 skill point for the tutorial, obviously. So you'll want this event running as action button and same as character. So it's on the same playing field as the character and action button, so the player can interact with this person and or whatever other image you set. Then after this switch is turned on, we'll go to page 2, make sure self switch is active, same as character, and make sure it's running in parallel so it can always take the player's input. Next, what you'll want to do is if button canceled is pressed down, and make sure it erases all of the images that you have set and turn off the switch so it reverts back to its original state. The reason that we want to erase the pictures is if the player presses cancel, you obviously want the menu to disappear. Then under that, I have cursor. So if button right is pressed down, variable X that we talked about a minute or two ago adds 100. This will change depending on how close or far apart you put your skills. But I do want to advise that you always make sure they are consistently apart. So you don't want skill A to be 100 from skill B and then skill B to C is 75, because you need consistent math to get from point A to B to C. So after that, you add 100 to our cursor X. And we want our picture 5, which is our cursor, X and Y to be equal to the variable of this. So when the player hits right, it will go right 100 pixels or whatever. And the opposite for left. Left, we want it to minus because the cursor's going backwards or to the left. So this is pretty simple. After that, we want to have a skill handle. So if you want to do fire, wind, air, whatever, You'll want to start by if OK button is pressed down. That will register in the engine as, hey, this player is pressing OK or their enter button. And then after the button is pressed down, it will check to see where the cursor is. So if the cursor is at X100 and Y100, and if skill fire is on, meaning the player has already learned it, they will get a text saying you have already learned the skill, try learning a harder version of it. And if else, so if the player has not learned fire skill, then we want to check if the player has enough skill points. If skill points is more than 0, would you like to purchase this skill? The skill is basic fire. It will cost you 1 skill point. Then give the player the choice, yes or no. You have learned magic. If they select yes, minus 1 of their skill points, so they don't have infinite skill points and you don't want your game to be bugged. And then control switch. I use switches to make sure that the player has a skill or doesn't have a skill. And then use the change skill command, the scope, which would be either a single person. If you want to do multiple skill trees, you can have it select people, or you can do the entire party. For my tutorial purpose, I did the entire party gets basic fire. And when no, again, no just exits. Now else, so this else is pulling from this. So if the player does not have enough skill points, so if it's not above 0, if skill points that the player has is not more than 0, it will give them this error message. You do not have enough skill points. You have variable 29 skill points. This variable number, or this little command that you see right here, will call a variable that you designated in the game. So in game, or right here for this purpose anyways, if we do this preview, this is how it will appear. You don't have enough skill points. You have 0 skill points. So let's say the skill costs 5 and our player has 4. If the variable is, let's say 13, you'll do the same command that you see right here, but in the brackets put 13 instead. That will call the variable 13, and in game it will display, again, let's say they have 4. You have 4 skill points. So, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. It's a super basic skill tree. You can obviously expand on this as much as you would like. Next, let's discuss why that we need our X and Y's to be equal and our addition or subtraction to be consistent. So every time you add 100, our starting point was 100, and that was set on this page by this variable. So 100, 100. So when the player clicks right, so when right is pressed down, it adds 100 to our X variable, meaning the picture moves to the right, or our cursor moves to the right by 100 pixels. So every time the player presses right or holds right, it's adding 100 every single time. So that moves our picture to the right every time. The reason that this is important is because the images that we set up at the beginning, our skill 1, 2, and 3, are exactly 100 apart. Our skill 1 is 100, 100, 200, 100, and 300, 100. So this means on the variable X horizon, it's 1, then 2, then 3. So the player clicks right once from the start, you'll be on skill 2. They click it again, they'll be on skill 3, and vice versa. So that's why that's important. But let's get around to boundaries. You don't want your cursor going out of bounds. So again, typically you're going to have to kind of figure out where you want your skill tree to end yourself. Typically I just kind of put it where the last skill is and where the first skill is. So for instance, let's do the first skill. We don't want the cursor to go too far to the left or off of the screen. So let's make an event that registers where the cursor is and if it's out of bounds or not. Okay, so what we did there is we made a cursor boundary. And what this does is it makes sure our cursor doesn't go out of bounds. So too far left, too far right, too far up, too far down. For this quick example, we just made it equal out to, if it goes below our starting point of 100, add 100 so it goes back to the right. And if our cursor is too far to the right, which is over 300, which is our skill 3, we want it to subtract 100 so it goes back to the left. Here's a quick example of this. I just really quick wanted to add on that your control variable for your X and Y that controls the cursor should be above the photo or image. Otherwise, the image will appear first and then it will equal out to that. That can cause some weird tearing or just some weird image issues where the cursor won't appear in the correct spot originally until the player hits a button. After setting the basic of too far left and too far right, and our math for going up or going right or going left, we want to use the move picture and we want to set it to our cursor. I believe our cursor was 5. So we want our move picture to equal the variable X and the variable Y that we created. And this right here will control this. So I'll show you an example really quick after we get this set up. Down here, by the way, you will want it to equal anything, to be honest. It's down here, you'll want it to equal anything you want to put. I personally choose 15 so it's a little more snappy, and I turned off wait for completion so the player doesn't have to wait for the cursor to snap into place. Now that I showed you how to create boundaries, let's go ahead and test our boundaries to make sure our code works. Now that I showed you how to move the picture back and forth and set its boundaries, let's actually test it to make sure our code works. So as you see, we have skill 1, add 100, skill 2, add another 100, skill 3. Now we did make a code that said if it's above 300, it should go back left to skill 3. Let's see if it works. It did. And let's test below 100. And it did. So that's essentially how you set boundaries. You obviously would be changing this one because I wouldn't expect your skill tree to end there. I would expect it around here, here, you know, kind of in a square or however you design it. Just make sure wherever your last skill is that your boundary is a little bit above it or larger than that number itself. And then make sure you subtract consistently like we've talked about before.